Having the ability to go relive one day and forget that day forever is something that brings us a lot of utility. On opening government, we're going to split this debate into different kinds of utility that we think we can argue upon. So we're going to segment this into one, the utility you derive during that day, and secondly, the utility you derive outside of that day. Because we think it is very reasonable that we can argue that you get more utility on both grounds, and that's where OG is going to argue on. So what are we going to argue? The first, we're going to talk about why it's very likely that you're able to forget a traumatic event, that you are not able to do so under any circumstances on opposition. The second is we're going to talk about why you're able to, for instance, get a lot of closure and not have to suffer from a lot of regret, from very bittersweet moments, which also helps impact you outside of that specific day. And then the last thing we're going to do is essentially talk about why during that day you're still able to receive quite a lot of utility and explain why that utility is also important in the same way that you can phone like a dead family member or something like that, except you actually get to talk to them during that day. So that's where opening government is going to contend on. Now, the first thing I want to point out at the very top of this is why people will not use this one cup of coffee for very, very dumb things that are disutile, that might also create negative, be negative for them in their life as well. This is for three reasons. The first is because we think people very clearly know that they only have one chance to drink this cup of coffee. And there's likely very strong norms around them that says, you only have one cup. Don't waste this cup going back to do something stupid, something that doesn't help you at all, or something that may be very, very bad. The second thing is we think that a lot of people are quite scared of the unknown. That is to say, to completely forget an entire day in their life, they're going to consider that thing very, very often. And notably, notice how this framing engages with our claims, right? We talk about traumatic events. You're not just going to have a high school heartbreak and think, oh, this is going to be something I'm going to remember forever and therefore want to get rid of this. You're more likely going to consider it very, very deeply and think, are there any other ways I can get rid of this kind of trauma? So you're going to have a lot of consideration and try to look for alternatives before you resort to this one cup, because you know you only have one chance in order to do this. But the last thing is that we think that there's zero societal pressure for individuals to do it, because there's absolutely nothing you can tell people after this. So you're going to make this decision by yourself for you. People are going to say, oh, you should take this cup of coffee for you, because there's absolutely no reason for you to listen to them, given that such a decision that is so important to you. First argument and why you cannot forget traumatic events in the absence of this coffee, and why we think this is very important. Look, the kinds of trauma people receive are incredibly arbitrary and also incredibly harmful to the individual character. I had no choice in deciding if I got for instance, assaulted as a child, or very, very bad things happened to my family, if my house burned down, and I have those visceral memories of my parents dying in that home. There was nothing I could control about those actions, and they're very, very real traumatic memories that stay in our mind forever. And the reason that you cannot get rid of them, even with the help of therapy and improving technology, is because you biologically cannot forget. The reason is humans are programmed to avoid being harmed again. If we've been hurt like that by our very own parents, as a child, did very bad things to you, you're programmed to remember those things for the rest of your life. And when you experience those traumatic moments, you cannot physically get them out of your mind. That is why in many instances, not only was the harm on you very arbitrary and completely outside of your control, it is also something you cannot get rid of. You have no autonomy over being able to have this thing. Now, what does this coffee actually do? It means that you're able to completely alter the life that you now live. Given that these memories are likely ones that constantly wake you up from your dreams, ones that, for example, scare you at every moment in your life, we think these are very, very, very damaging things to you and your well-being. And so we think it is absolutely necessary for us to give people an option to opt out of these instances and forget these very traumatic memories, even if it is just for one day, given the fact that they had absolutely no autonomy in this, and also because they biologically cannot forget. Second part of this second argument about basically how you can, second and third argument about love and having bittersweet memories. But before that, POIs from closing. No POI, I'll move on. So the second argument, no thank you. The second argument is specifically about love and loss. We think it's the case that there are many, many instances in your life where you just want to see somebody from one last time. And maybe it's okay that we forget that one person. So here's how we think this is likely going to happen. We don't think you're going to pick the best memory you ever had with your mother and say, I want to go back and remember that memory. However, you're going to find an average day that you were able to spend with your mom, who perhaps passed away, and you're going to say, I want to turn this day for that one specific day and turn that into something special. Here's why this is important, both during that day and also outside of that day. During that day, obviously you get to spend time with somebody you've never seen before. Presumably you have memories from before and you know that she passed away or something like that. So we think it is very real that you derive a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment from being being in that day. But also, knowing that you will be able to see your mother again before you drink that cup of coffee is also a form of catharsis and very high utility, which we think helps that individual very much. The last thing is about the bittersweet memories and things that you regret. We think there are many moments in our life where we're just willing to try to redo something or to close things up and finish a relationship and then be able to move on. We think this is also a mechanism for us to achieve that. That is to say, very messy breakups in which I was able to close everything up and then finish with that relationship. So in all aspects, we think this one cup of coffee has the capacity to bring a lot of fulfillment, and we're very, very proud to propose.
If Andy did a thank you speech, then I guess I have to do one too. Also, I owe Ethan, because the last time he forgot my cat's name, so I didn't give him one. But thanks for, I think, remembering my cat's names now. Oh, also, yeah, thank you, Ethan, for being my debate partner for, like, the last 4 years. Here's to retirement, I guess. Thanks, OrdCom, too, and everyone else here. I know Andy's taking biology, but he doesn't seem to understand how memories work. I want to clear this up on OO and then explain firstly why this franchise is inherently exploitative, and secondly on the extreme discomfort that individuals will feel after they return to the present. Refutation will be integrated. First on exploitation then. First, why do we think the pricing of this coffee is necessarily going to be very expensive, very exploitative, and very harmful to individuals? We think that because this is a franchise, it likely means that they have a lot of resources to put into marketing and things. So they're going to market it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to go back into the past and to change something that you perhaps are very invested in. But also, no other corporation likely has the ability to compete with them or to produce similar products. This is clearly some magical being, right? So we think not only is this corporation likely going to be very, very, very rich, but also all of these products that they're selling to people are going to be quite expensive. Second, why do we think this experience and this company itself existing is so exploitative then? First, given the fact that you're going to forget the memory out afterwards, we think there's very little incentive for people to go into very good memories, like Andy says, right? So this means that the people must go back to things like bad memories or memories that were very salient to them. We think it's very unlikely that you're going to go back to some average day that you spent with your mom, because in the moment when you're choosing which memory to go back to, that is not one of the memories that pops out to you as a choice for you to take, right? It's very difficult for you to do something like I don't know, remember that random day your mom took you on a walk into in the park. Rather, you're going to go back to memories that were very, very salient to you, that jump out at you when you have this opportunity. But this also means that people are very likely to go back to bad memories or traumatic memories and relive those experiences to get what they consider to be ultimate closure, right? We think so long as this franchise exists and this option exists, that people always feel as though they do not gain full or complete closure from their traumatic memories if they have not taken the step back to go and fix or to forget fully that experience. But secondly, why do we think this corporation is going to act in very exploitative ways to get people to buy into their product, and why people will never actually be able to believe they can attain closure without it? First, again, on marketing, right? We think that oftentimes the marketing surrounding this type of coffee will be to say that this is the only way you can solve your traumas, that without completely and wholly forgetting it or reliving it, that you have no capacity to, for example, solve your fear of dogs or solve that memory of you being assaulted, when in reality there are many other alternative options that could be quite helpful to this individual. We think that in and of itself creates a negative utility where this individual could have gone to other things, but now they're being constantly reminded by this franchising company that they're not actually fully healed, and we think this is quite harmful to all of the other traumas that individuals can have that they now no longer can heal from, right? We don't think individuals are kind of one-dimensional creatures that only have one fear, one trauma that they need to solve. We think it's unfair for them to be constantly reminded of these things when they can no longer go back to that coffee shop and drink that coffee. What are the impacts of this then? First, we think that there's likely going to be some false sense of control that these individuals feel prior to returning to that moment in uncontrollable situations, because it's simply untrue that individuals have full control over the traumas that they experience, right? I cannot go back to a day that I had a very traumatic car crash in and decide to not make that drunk driver swerve into my car. That is not something I can do. But it's very likely that this franchise or corporation, with all of their marketing and money, is going to convince this individual that they can have control of this situation. We think this unnecessarily puts these individuals into highly dangerous, highly traumatic situations that they have to relive in the moment when they have the false pretense that this is the only way that they can access that closure. We think that was extremely unfair, and we'd rather they just go to therapy like a normal person. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you have autonomy during that day. Why do you still have to suffer that day again if you know something traumatic was going to happen?
Because not everything starts exactly at not everything happens like at noon or something. Some things are simply unavoidable. You can perhaps try your best to avoid it. That doesn't mean that something else isn't going to happen that hurts you. The problem in this instance is that they give you a false sense of control. You don't necessarily have control in this situation, and you guys are assuming this too, right? Like, you guys are assuming that you can just avoid all of these traumatic things that happen. That might not be the case. That gives individuals so much less utility. It makes them feel even worse because they originally believed that they could avoid their fate. We think that's very bad. But secondly, on this idea of the extreme discomfort that you feel when you start like forgetting these memories, right? First, we think this memory is presumably very important to you. It's probably like you choose to go back to this day over all of the other days that you could have possibly chosen. So it probably had a large impact on this person's identity, even if it's just like an average day with your mother. What does that mean when you come back then? Because we think that memories aren't simply memories that exist in a vacuum, but they also do things like impact all of the other memories you have, the way that you like view the world and your other experiences. If you have trauma because a dog bit you, probably every single memory that you have with a dog is now like tinged with fear and tinged with a little bit of sadness. We think that this now becomes unexplainable when you go back to that day you got bit by a dog and choose to forget it entirely. It means that now every time you see a dog and your subconscious tells you that you're very afraid of this creature, that you no longer have an explanation for yourself that could have been cathartic under our side of the house, where you could have explained all of your reactions and traumas away. Now when you are fighting with your partner because you were like traumatized by your ex, you no longer have a reason to tell them like, this is why I'm reacting the way that I am. We thought that this is also extremely harmful. We thought the way that humans currently self-justify to themselves, the way that their traumas impact their current behaviors, is extremely helpful for the way that they deal with their traumas in the present and the way that they impact them. Government takes this ability away from them entirely. We think it's better for this franchise to never exist in the first place. Please, let's let people deal with their traumas like normal people. Proud giveaways.
Speaker, your body and your memory is necessarily a prison. When you see something bad that happens and it has a long-lasting effect on you, you necessarily cannot control what happened to you in that moment. If I walk by an alleyway and I see someone doing something grotesque, like murdering someone, and now whenever I see blood, I want to throw up. I feel horrible about myself, and I have to relive that memory. I had no way in the entire world of possibly consenting to that thing happening to me. We think this continues to affect people on a deeply emotional basis. It affects their day-to-day life, and if we have a magical coffee that they can drink, and they can forget about that day forever, and they can use that day to do something that is actually meaningful to them, or something that actually makes them happy, we absolutely would support this franchise. I want to first talk about my partner's case, extend onto it a little bit, and then I'll go on to some refutation on their arguments. My partner first told you that this will be used in a very good way. And this is what they failed to contend. They told you that people will not think about this and use it on a whim, and they can't deal with their worst memories because they're just going to use it on something that's random. We told you that's not true. One, there's no other social pressure for people like telling you to take it because you don't remember what happened before, so people don't actually know if it had a positive effect on them or if they didn't. But also, we told you that people know they only have this one shot, and it's something that's most likely something they've thought a lot about. They've asked their friends and family, and they most likely agreed that doing this is the best option for them. But alongside from this, we told you that most likely you're able to get rid of things like trauma that happen in your life. Aside from just a principled basis, I think if this road were to exist, we would want it to exist because now people have a greater autonomy over themselves. They know that they can get rid of bad memories that continue to affect them, whilst on side opposition, they cannot. But also, we just told you, this is very good for people on their daily lives. It's good for their mental health. They're able to remove traumatic memories that make them unhappy. They're able to remove memories of past abusive relationships that maybe now make them afraid to get into new relationships, and to create new positive memories within their life due to the long-lasting negative memories that they once experienced. They might say in their second, but these are important memories that are part of your identity. These are things that you need to learn, but you never consented to that identity. The fact that someone did extremely bad things to you, you never actually agreed to that in happening. But also, I think some memories are just so overpowering, or some things that are very negative, that just like you're not able to extrapolate any meaningful like learning experience from them. They prevent you from getting help and going to therapy because of how traumatic they actually are. This is the number one most important impact in this round. Second, we told you about love and loss. like the amount of utility you can actually experience by just spending another day with your parent. They told you that this is most likely not going to be how it's used. We don't understand why not, as insofar people probably want to like remember the most happy days with their parents, so they're not going to pick a super special day. They can just pick another mundane day that maybe back then in their lives when they didn't really appreciate their parents, but they're able to spend another day with them, and this is able to make them like feel very happy that they're now able to tell their family that I love you extremely much. And it's just like spending a lot of time with them in of itself, we think is very valuable, even if you don't remember it again. And third, I just want to add a like illustration about like this regret bittersweet thing. Like I have a lot of regrets in my life. Maybe if I had this coffee, I would use it on a day that like probably a more meaningful moment, but like Nats finals, I could like debated better, won Nats finals, and then I'd be able to like forget that forever, so I don't have the memory of me like losing, or like the day of not making whatever big achievement that I wanted to do that continues to, I don't know, make me a bit sad at times. These are times where I can use this. I think it's quite helpful. Let's go into some refutation. They told you that you will like use it on your most salient memories, but these memories won't be your most happy memories. I don't know, it sounded like a contradiction. I don't know if I heard them right, but didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Okay, onto their argument about how this is exploitative. They told you to use therapy instead. I have so many responses to this. One, therapy is not a magic solution that eventually like just cures stuff. You still have this memory. It's something that's biologically ingrained into you. You're not just gonna suddenly get it better because you go to therapy. Some things are just very traumatic, and even therapy doesn't work 100% of the time. But also, we think therapy is extremely expensive. People do not have access to it. Sure, maybe this will also be expensive, but therapy is something that's long-term, that you have to continue doing through months or even years for it to be actually effective. On our side, this is a one-time cost that they're actually able to take. But also, I think therapy is not mutually exclusive. On our side, if you get rid of this like one bad memory, it makes it easier for you to find other support systems like your family and friends, and to better connect with therapists, because now you're able to deal with other more trivial problems in your life instead of having this one big block blocking your entire healing process. But thirdly, not everyone has access to family and friends and very healthy support systems that can help them deal with their problem. On their side, they cannot claim this. On our side of the house, they also said you can't remove bad memories. Like, dude, just don't get on the car. Do something else. Maybe you can also get hit by a plane, but the chances of that are extremely unlikely. Just don't relive your traumatic memory and have the day to yourself. You can do something fun. You can ask out a girl. You can do a bunch of stuff that you wish you would have done. We think this is a good plan. Happy to propose.
All right, I'll also do a thank you speech. Thank you, Jackie, for putting up with my shenanigans for the entire 4 years. Last tournament, so super fun. I will look forward to judging everybody else in the room and absolutely tanking your speaks, which I personally quite enjoy. I first want to start off by talking about how people actually heal and find closure. We think that in order to do that, you need to find acceptance that this happened. You need to address the root of the problem. You need to understand where all your fears are coming from. You need to be able to build coping mechanisms. And we also think it's very important that you need to be able to believe that closure and healing is possible in the first place. This takes out OG case very simply because people do not necessarily have one singular trauma. Obviously, there might be one that stands out from the rest, but the other ones that exist in your life can still have many negative effects. So when you actually weigh it out at the end of the day, just based on the ideas themselves, if you think about the way in which the traumas interact with us in our everyday lives, if it is true that all the trauma under their side of the house goes completely unsolved, as Jackie proved to you, and you get no response, then they still are utility negative, because then they aren't able to find any solution to any of the other issues plaguing their life. We think that is necessarily harmful when you still have an opportunity to tackle all of those issues under our side of the house through systematic processes like therapy and talking it out. couple things. Refutation rebuilding, I want to weigh this. But first, I want to wash out, no thank you, any utility benefits you're able to get during that day. And it's very simple why. If it is true that you forget that day after you do it, then the memories that are associated with it that would have been utility positive under their side of the house are actually useless. And the reason is very simple. The only reason we care about memories, whether good or bad, is because we go back to it. If it's simply a mundane day where you don't do anything, we don't think that that day is even important in the first place, right? Like, this is why we don't even remember that random Saturday you had lunch with your sister, because that stuff just happens. It gets deleted from your memory. It doesn't have impact on the rest of your life. So even if it is true that they're able to get some sort of catharsis during it, the overall impact that you get at the end of the day still amounts to 0. And we would say that if it is true that you have utility negative results by doing this, then that should outweigh, because that is what is going to last you for the rest of your life. We are able to outweigh on scope later. But first, on the argument about being able to solve your traumas, I want to point out 2 things here. The first thing is that trauma is not necessarily instantaneous. Sure, you might have trauma from, for example, having a car crash with your, seeing your parents in a car crash, which is one day, but it might be prolonged instances of bullying that do exist. Understand that under their side of the house, they're still going to go back to those prolonged memories because they are so salient and so visceral. We think that is actually harmful because they think that they can solve all of their problems, but their trauma still actually stays. In the best case instance, where the trauma is a one-day thing, we still don't think this actually helps, because trauma is subconscious. When you look at something necessarily after you have trauma, sure, it might remind you of your memories, but there's also an aspect of it that's subconscious. It's your body's protective mechanism against it. So if you were bitten by a dog and there's no fact that and you're not actually changing that you didn't get bitten by a dog because it reverts back to the original way, you still have a subconscious urge every time you see a dog to recoil, because that's what your body has developed for you naturally. If that is indeed the case, they don't solve any of the issues under their side, because sure, you forget the memories, but all of these chills, all of these shivers that you get, the uncomfortable feelings you feel in your chest that actually comprise the most harmful aspects of trauma still exist under their side of the house. We think that is unnecessarily harmful. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you claim that marketing is going to be really, really coercive, but explain why your thoughts are the most proximate thing.
Oh yeah, that's a really good thing. People don't think when they're in emotional pain. I think this is very simple to understand. This is why nobody can control themselves that well when they're really, really angry. When you're experiencing extreme emotional pain under their side of the house, understand that you don't think straight. So you're more likely to make impulsive decisions. But our case isn't even hung on that in the first place. We tell you that because people think that they can go and get all their issues resolved when they actually cannot, and they actually still have the same issues afterwards, that is necessarily coercive and necessarily praise off, no thank you, the negative emotions that everybody is feeling. We think in the worst case scenario, you pay $10 for your coffee, even if it's $3, but you get 0 benefit out of it under their side of the house, versus in our side of the house, when we tell you there are systematic processes that we have literally learned over the years that of how to deal with trauma, how to help people when they can't think straight because they're suffering from so much emotional pain. These are things that we are able to help in the status quo that they cannot. They've tried to put a band-aid on a bullet hole in that regard. So why is this then so necessarily harmful then? I think it's a couple things here. The first is on why this is exploitation, and this takes out their consent claim in the first place. Because sure, you never consented into getting the trauma that you have, but you also never consented into getting all of your memories wiped, into being prescribed a solution that doesn't actually work. We think that is unnecessarily exploitative. But we also think that in the future, just weighing on utility here, even if we're able to resolve that one bit of trauma, you still have all the offshoots of the problems that come with trauma that cause you to feel immense emotional pain. But now you can't find the reason why. And you also can't find the reason for why, and you don't want to find closure for all the other issues that you have, other trauma that you have. We think that in that regard, you are so much worse under proposition. Proud to oppose.
3 issues with the opening team, and 3 fronts of utility that closing is going to solve this. 3 issues with opening. Firstly, on the idea of trauma that both opening teams spend 10 minutes on. Here's why trauma is not probably going to be that big of a deal in this round. Firstly, it is that trauma is a thing that is built up over time. So even when this side is going to concede that people perhaps on this side are going to take this thing to get rid of trauma, trauma happens over a long period of time. So perhaps you have trauma from getting bullied every single day. Then that's not going to be cured by one day being moved away. But secondly, why are people actually going to face this trauma in the first place? Because note that it is a day-long episode and that you have to face your traumas in the first place. Our opening did not prove exactly why they would actually want to experience these things and go face these things in the first place in order to overcome these trauma, and why they want to fear this very scary bully in the first place. Second thing on if people are going to actually just casually take this thing and just take it on their most casual days. Note that this is something that is going to be life-altering. You're forgetting this one day in your life. You're forgetting this very, very important day. So I just cannot see, and I don't see any mechanism as to why people are actually going to just go like, I'll just casually take this about them some casual day. And this is the third issue that is wrong with opening, and specifically with our opening, when they tell you that people are going to take this on casual, bittersweet moments. Because OG does not take on the burden that people are going to take this in their best days or their most distraught days, when the moments that they needed the most. Because there are overarching narratives that say like, this is something, your one and only chance. This is the only chance you'll get to take this. You'll forget this completely. You won't get to live a life without this if once this moment is gone. This is your one moment. This is something that is very important. You are going to take this on your best days. So why is it that people are going to use it on the best cases and in their best days? Firstly, it is that they understand that this is something that is it's a very lifelong thing, and that it is going to be experienced across like your entire life, that you will be able to forget this. So this means that people are not going to take this in their mid-20s. They're not going to take this when they're 15. They're not going to take this when they're 30, because they're not going to forget this memory forever. And it's not going to be trauma like the opening teams are probably characterizing it to be. It's going to be some very, very happy memory that you no longer are going to remember. But next, there's probably, because this is a franchise, there's probably things that are explaining what this experience is going to be like. Please note that people are aware of this coffee shop being a thing. People are recording YouTube videos. They're sharing their experiences taking these things. So yeah, perhaps people are going to take this coffee, then record it, and they say, like, this thing, I was not able to remember it. I was not able to actually face these fears. I forgot this completely. It was a very harmful thing for me to take. Yeah.
How am I supposed to remember what memories I'm going to forget in like 5 to 10 years and take this coffee strategically so I revisit that happy memory?
Because when you are taking this coffee, it is a coffee that is lifelong, that you will only have one chance to have this in your entire life. And this is the third thing that we're telling you, is that you have one chance to take this coffee. This chance is your most sacred moment. You are the savior for this moment. This moment is going to be your only chance in your 70 years of living for you to take this. So you're going to cherish these memories in these processes in order for you to have the most utility out of this, so you're able to have this one chance and grasp it properly. Okay, cool. But this is very important, because this means that the most vulnerable people will be able to experience the most utility in the most dire or in their final moments. Like, look, the cancer patient that is slowly drifting away and is looking at their clock ticking and their heart rate monitor slowing down. This means that in their final moments, they're able to take this coffee and reflect on the most happy moments in their lives. They're able to get the most happiness that they would in these moments. I'm not sure how opposition is able to provide this happiness to this poor cancer patient. Or the depressed person that is on their final lifeline, and this looks like they no longer are able to continue on with life, and in their final moments, rather than overdosing, they want to look at the final thing that their life made them happy at once, that they haven't felt in 20 years. They're able to take this coffee and look back at it and say, this was the time where I was happy, now I can move on. But the next reason why this is so very important is because of all the framing that everybody is conceding to. It is that it is a very, very important moment. It is that it's a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It is that you will no longer get to take this ever again. This means that when you're preparing for your one and only chance to drink this coffee and your one and only chance to relive these moments, you want to have memories that are worth reliving. This means making sure that your day goes as good as possible, making sure that you're as happy as possible when you go through your days, so you can have one perfect day that you're willing to actually go back in your final moments to look back at this perfect day and feel the most happy possible. And on these premises, I'm so proud to propose. Woo!
I thank the speaker for those remarks. I now invite the member of opposition to address notices five.
I start, I'd also like to give a thank you speech to Kelvin. Yeah, thanks, Kelvin, and thank you for everyone being here, and thank you to the judges and Raymond, who's also a judge. Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. There's going to be 2 things coming out of CO. First, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of framing as to what type of memories are going to, what these types of memories are going to look like, and when you're going to make the decision of drinking that coffee. Second, I'll characterize what trauma actually is, and then I'll go into our point about why intrinsically forgetting a memory, even if it's really, really bad, is likely going to be very bad for you. First, let's talk about what types of memories are likely going to be forgotten. I think OO points this out already. It's likely going to be very, very traumatic memories. I disagree with CG. I don't think you're going to likely forget like happy memories, and the reason why is because if you think about when you're going to be drinking this cup, this cup of coffee, it's when you're going to be very, very rash. That is to say, after you think that your life just ended because you made a mistake when you were a teenager, that's when you're going to take this coffee. So I think that we've all had these moments where we just think everything is over because one thing happened. We think that that's when you're likely going to take this coffee. It doesn't even have to be a traumatic moment. It just has to be a memory you think in the moment is very, very bad and is going to be affecting you. Second thing, what is trauma then? There's 2 pieces of framing I want to give under this. The first is that trauma mainly comes from the consequences of the event. What that is to say then is that when you see your father die, the reason why you feel sadness from that event is not specifically because of the event, but rather because you miss your dad. So for example, you feel the absence of your dad no longer being there, or you realize that you no longer have a father figure. It's not intrinsically from that event. But the second thing to note is that trauma builds up over time, but people will pinpoint a specific moment to pinpoint that as a trauma. So for example, if you get treated horribly in relationships, you're continually going to have that trauma. So you might not trust people, you're going to get in horrible relationships, you choose horrible people to date, but what you pinpoint as your trauma is the day you get cheated on, and that's the day you're going to choose to forget. We think that this is very, very harmful, which I'm going to get into, but before that, go ahead.
Yeah, at best, this is just mitigation to our claim. Maybe not everyone can get rid of their trauma, but a large majority of people can, and even if you can't get rid of all of it, it helps you remove something that is blocking a lot of your trauma so you can get help from therapy afterwards.
Yeah, I'll weigh that, because if you want to talk about therapy, I think it is far better for you to go into therapy knowing exactly what happened and knowing how to deal with that. If you just arbitrarily realize you miss your dad, but you don't know what happened to your dad, what are you going to tell the therapist? I think that therapy session is likely going to be far worse. Okay, let's talk about why forgetting about this trauma is very, very bad. And what this is going to lead you. The first thing I want to know is that this is likely going to lead you to making the same mistake again. So this cup of coffee is actually setting you up for failure. I'll deal with arbitrary trauma later, which is what OG talks about, but let's talk about one of the types of memories you forget, which is when you feel really, really regretful of something you did. So for example, let's say let's say you accidentally killed someone, you drove a car, you killed someone, you feel really, really guilty about that. I think this is also you're overwhelmed by guilt, overwhelmed by so many rash emotions, you don't know what you're going to do. I think this is another instance where you're likely going to take the cup of coffee. The reason why this is bad, sorry, that was a really bad example. But the reason why this is bad is because you're likely going to get into the same experience, you're going to go into bad experiences again. So for example, let's say you forget the day that you got cheated on, because that's what you pinpoint your trauma on. However, that doesn't solve all the relationship issues you have, the trust issues you have, meaning that you're likely just going to go into the same problems, you're going to go into the same relationships, you're going to keep dating red flags. We think that this is very, very harmful because you're likely going to run into someone who's going to cheat on you again, and there's no second cup of coffee. The reason why we're able to solve this is because of the fact that we teach people to deal with their trauma. Jerry says that therapy is really, really bad, therapy is expensive, and therapy takes a long time. But we prefer this much better. We think that this is a much better alternative insofar as you're able to, for example, conceptualize your trauma. You're able to talk to people about it. Maybe in the short term, it's really, really bad. You're still thinking about when you get cheated on, and it's a very, very traumatic experience for you. However, in the long term, you're likely going to overcome this and learn from your mistake so you don't get cheated on again. But the second thing to note is that I just don't think the alternative is always that bad. I think that we all have really, really bad experiences, but we get through it because we make good connections with our friends and family, and they help us through it. We think those connections you make along the way as you overcome those memories are very, very important as well and make up, I guess, our life. Second, then, I want to talk about arbitrary trauma and, I guess, things that just don't relate to you and things, just not part of your control. The first thing to note is that I think the sadness you feel is going to be about the same. OG can call this mitigatory, but it mitigates your case because you no longer have an impact. Because the reason why this is, because trauma doesn't come specifically from that one event. Trauma will continue to exist. If your father died and you witnessed him die in a car crash, you feel trauma from that event, but you also feel the absence and the consequences of that event. So for example, you feel the fact that he's no longer there, that the house is empty, and that's going to make you sad. You still have that unexplainable sadness inside you. Maybe you no longer see him die in a car crash, you don't see blood, but that doesn't make it much, that doesn't make, take away your completely take away your sadness. But second thing to note is, again, trauma builds up over time, and CG correctly points this out. Because trauma builds up over time, the types of trauma you develop doesn't just happen from one day, but from multiple days, and those days are still going to be pretty bad. But also, I think that you need to remember that, I also think that in order to get better, you need to know the memory insofar as you're able to conceptualize it and you're able to learn to be okay with it. I think that therapy, again, is far harder if you don't remember why you're feeling so much anger and so much sadness. Proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for those remarks. I now invite the government to address exploitative activities posed to the child. Here, here.
Wait, I was
Ready? I'm going to structure this speech by answering what I think are the two most important questions in this debate and proving why the CG extension wins on both of them. Firstly, what are the types of days that people are likely going to go back to? And this deals with almost all the teams in this debate. And secondly, can actions be utile even if you forget them in the future? So, in terms of what types of days people are likely going to go to, OO suggests that you go to your worst days and then you just end up failing to cope with that trauma. So does what CO suggests. And OG says that you're also going to your worst days, or maybe average days with your mom, for example, and get utility from that. I think the problem with opening half, as well as CO, is that they overestimate how changing one day is able to shape your identity, which suggests that maybe a small percentage of people are truly defined by one day, but for the vast majority of people, their identity is built up of the experiences that they've accumulated over a lifetime, which means that your one day of changing, insofar as this experience, is not going to actually change the outcome of your identity in the very first place. For example, if I have trauma from my dad abusing me, that's built up over time and over the course of a couple of days or a couple of years, which suggests that even if I change one day of when he beats me, my identity overall is not going to change. If I have mommy issues, for example, that is also built up over the course of many days of my childhood, which suggests that even if I want to go back to that day, it's very hard for me to change the trauma in the very first place. Jerry's own example, his insecurity in this debate, isn't because of one day where he lost nationals, it's because of a long plethora of losses that he's experienced. And so the implication is that both OG and OO's attempts at trying to solve trauma through this coffee is not likely going to be the bigger picture within this debate, because given that opening opposition has no solution towards this trauma, and opening government has a very bad solution towards this trauma, the likely outcome of this is just that this debate is not actually about trauma in the very first place, because people are not stupid. They recognize that you cannot change your identity with one day, which suggests that the most amount of people are likely going to take this coffee to relive a good experience. So that's where we come in, right? Opening government says that you are likely going to relive your average days, and then you'll be happy as a result of this. We would suggest that this actually doesn't bring that much utility or bring the potential utility that you're able to maximize. So we thought that people actually used it in their worst days, or days in which you want, not your worst days, your best days, right, where you have a lot of happiness and you want to relive those instances in which they need it the most. So as Feiyang points out, things such as cancer patients can now go and relive a day without that sort of disease. A depressed single person who's a loser can go back to the days, they won Harvard. Andy. And so these are the proudest outcomes of this coffee that we suggest are we're able to reach on our side of the house, in which people are able to relive their best days and then derive utility from that. That extends beyond OG's average days, which they talk about in both their speeches. We would suggest that you're able to help people in the moment, and that's very, very, very important. So with that being said, The second question becomes, can activities be utile even when you forget them? Because the biggest opposition critique here against our entire case, and also opening government's second argument, is that you shouldn't have utility from this because you just end up forgetting about the memory. So look, I think this is the most important question to answer in this debate, because opening government's second argument relies on being able to get utility even if you forget this, and opening opposition's largest critique towards our case is that if we're able to not understand the memories of this, then you don't actually get utility from this. So I want to weigh as to why utility actually exists and then win based on those grounds. In our world, you go through positive actions, right? Positive utility, and you forget about it. So to prove that utility still exists, let's brainstorm a scenario in which there's negative utility committed on someone, and then you forget about that, and let's see if that still exists, right? So if I'm asleep last night, and Jerry violates me in my sleep, and I forget about that completely, there's still a wrong that is being done. There's negative utility on me, and because of the fact that I forget about it, it doesn't excuse whether or not that action takes place or has meaning in this world in the very first place. With that logic, if negative utility exists even when we're forgotten, we would suggest that in the same way, positive utility, even when forgotten, can be valid in this debate as well. So here's where we come in, right? Given this revelation, why do we win? Number one, on our side of the house, people are able to maximize happiness in that moment for one day, and that is valued even if you even if you forget about that one day. And that's very important. It's the benefit that we get where people are able to relive their best and most happiest lives. All the experiences that Feiyang talks about in his illustrations, that's the utility that you're able to access on our side of the house. But secondly, it's that people know that you're able to relive that day in the future, and that in itself brings utility because it allows people to live the most out of their lives. In the last minute of Feiyang's speech, he makes it very clear that instead of spending your days doom scrolling, you're more likely to go out and actually live your life and do experiences because you know that you're able to relive that day in the very future, which suggests that not only are people able to access the days that they were happiest in the short term, but in the long term, in the scope of living their lives, they're able to have more fulfilling lives because they want memories to come back to, which is why people are happier on our side. Very proud to stand.
I think the speaker remarks, I'd like the opposition with.
Can I start?
Yes, you can.
Seal wins this round because Grace gives you the most precise and complete explanation of number one, what trauma looks like, number two, what days are people likely to choose to forget, and number three, what are the most important elements of trauma recovery and growing from your mistakes. Here's what she told you. She explained that number one, so this is the conceptualization on CO of what people will look like. So other teams are correct to point out that trauma is continuous. There will be, it is a continuous build of emotions, but there will be days where it is particularly visceral. So for example, in a toxic relationship, you probably develop trauma alongside that relationship. There are probably also days where it's particularly bad. For example, you've been physically abused, or the day you found out you were cheated on, whatever. So we explained that those singular days with the most concentrated negative emotions, those are the days that are likely going to place people under significant emotional stress where they will ultimately be tempted to choose to drink the coffee. Those are the most likely scenarios where, in the case where people choose to forget about trauma, I'll engage with their content about happy days later. But that's the most likely scenario of what's going to happen. A continuous experience of trauma where people choose to forget the most traumatic days. Why is this really bad? Grace explained to you this is incredibly bad for two reasons. Number one, on trauma recovery. We're able to beat out OG's content about seeking closure because if it is true that trauma occurs over time, as well as the fact that there are greater consequences of trauma. So for example, even if you're able to forget the day your dad died, if you're able to forget that day, you still have negative utility from just the absence of your father. So there are many other harms of trauma that you don't fully get. So the margin of impact that they're able to get on lessening the negative disutility of trauma is very small. Comparatively, we have a far greater margin of change on how people are actually able to recover from the trauma. This is unique analysis from Grace. She explained to you that many times trauma recovery depends on people being able to rationally consider their actions on that day. So for example, victims of domestic abuse, knowing that it wasn't their fault that they were assaulted that day. People who failed to save their loved ones in an accident, rationally recognizing that it wasn't their fault that they were unable to prevent that accident. those are the things that you lose out if you forget the important pieces of memories of your traumatic experience. You cannot rationally consider these actions if you forget the day that those actions existed. That is the important part. Unique analysis from grace. That is why people are left feeling a general sense of something wrong have happened, but can't pinpoint the exact place where they've gone wrong and the exact place that they needed to go back and fix. That is why trauma recovery gets far worse on our side.
Someone that goes to war can rationally understand why they had to kill someone else, but that doesn't remove the image of the little boy he killed.
Okay, so the war example probably doesn't exist. It's not one day. You can't delete the memory of war from one day. Okay, anyways, so that's why trauma recovery gets worse on our side. But second piece of unique analysis is forget trauma. Even if trauma happens, the important thing is how you move on from this trauma. Grace was the only one that explained to you how people actually learn from mistakes. That is because the viscerally remembering the harms of trauma is important for you to grow from those mistakes. So not the exact same level of comparison, but say everyone rationally knows that we need to stop procrastinating, but you don't actually do it because you don't have the willpower to do it. The only point of which you actually, for example, if people continuously get into toxic relationships, the only way for you to actually learn from this mistake is if you viscerally remember the harmful impact of getting into those relationships, or if you viscerally remember a day where your procrastination has caused you serious distress. In the cases where you're able to forget those memories, you don't learn from these mistakes, which leads you to make those mistakes over again. And given that you only have one coffee to forget this, even if we assume that everything they say is true, that you're able to decrease some amount of negative utility from the first time you committed this mistake, if you just do these mistakes again, it's just the same thing all over again, except you've wasted more times not learning from mistakes. So both of these unique analysis means that actually remembering, viscerally remembering the memory from those days with concentrated negative emotion is actually important for your trauma recovery and important for your ability to grow from a mistake. Lastly, how do we weigh this impact against government's content about what if you just want to experience a good day again and forget it? We outweigh on 3 metrics. Number 1, likelihood. So it is unlikely people to choose those random good days that happen because people are more rational when they're happy, right? That is when they're likely to feel oh, I only have one chance. I don't want maybe another good day will come. But when people are really, really sad, that is when they're down in their feels and they're more likely to use this chance irrationally. Secondly, on impact. Look, just like trauma is over time, happy memories are also over time. There's no one day of debate where I can just choose to remember that day and relive all my good experiences with fellow debaters. It comes from a continuous relationship from being part of the debate community. So the margin of impact of your ability to relive happy memories is very small, whereas the long-term impacts of us being able to recover from trauma better and prevent